Hello everyone, welcome to Chaudhary Data World channel. Today I am here with a new video in SQL video series, that is locking in SQL. We'll be watching the overview details of what locking in SQL is, why is it important, all these things we'll be watching into this particular video. So let's get started with the video. Before moving ahead with this locking in SQL, let me take you back to the first class, that is categories or subsets of SQL. That means this SQL language, it is getting categorized into 5 different subsets, that are DDL, DML, TQL, DCL and TCL. In DML, we already saw these 3 commands, that are insert, update and delete. For the call, we will be covering up into the stored procedure videos in upcoming videos. And this lock, it was remaining. Since this lock concept is a bit different one and it's a bit explanatory, so I am covering this up into this particular one. So let's jump to this slide where we will look at this lock. Now in this locking in SQL, before moving ahead with locking in SQL, let me just recap one thing, that is what is transactions in SQL. So transactions is nothing but the logical unit of the database operation. So suppose if you are having a chunk of operation, that means if you are modifying your data and for that modification you are having a chunk of code in which first you are selecting some of the data, then you are modifying those data, then you are suppose even deleting those data. All these when gathered into in one chunk, it is called as transaction in SQL. So that is only the logical unit of work that consists database operation. Now we can go ahead with locking in SQL. So now assume a scenario. Let me take you to the presentation mode. Assume a scenario where there are multiple users for a particular database, because it is possible that if you are using one database, that database can be used by some other user as well. So when multiple users are there for a single database, it might happen a scenario that for a particular table or for a particular data, that one user if is interacting with that particular data, another user may also be interacting at the same time with that particular data. Only interaction may go seamlessly, but if suppose some updation or modification into the data one user is doing, the another user may end up in some data conflict, or you may say it may end up with having data inconsistency. Data inconsistency means if suppose there is a primary ID 3, that means the in third row user 1 is doing some changes, and this second user is also he also wants to have that change or some other change into that third row only applied at that same particular time, then data conflict will definitely arise, right? Because both of the user want to interact with the same data at the same time. So to deal up with this particular problem, SQL came with the concept of locking. So this particular diagram, with this you will easily understand that this is user 1, this is user 2, both having their different transactions. That is the code 1 is the transaction 1, code 2 is the transaction 2, both users is having, and both is interacting with the same table or the same data, you may say. At the same time, it goes seamlessly or it goes fine, it may go fine when they are selecting the query, that means when they are only viewing the data. But when they are going ahead with data modification category, that means insert, update or delete, so at that particular moment only, if suppose that particular guy is modification that one data, and this code this user 2 is also accessing the data or modifying the data, same data, then it may end up with the conflict of the data. To come up with the solution, only thing which is applied, that in the transaction, this for this particular table lock will be applied And what is now lock and how is it when getting applied, we will be watching into the next slide. So moving ahead with the next slide, how does it, the whole process, how does it goes? It start with very first step, that is transaction start. Of course, that transaction will start. DB setup transaction environment. Of course, whenever transaction start, your database recognizes that transaction, it set up an environment for you for a particular user. If suppose if there are multiple users, there will be multiple transaction environment getting set up for by that particular DB. After that, we are having transaction request lock. So suppose if into our code we are in that particular transaction, we are locking that transaction, then obviously it will not end up with having any conflict. So when it is you are requesting any lock on that particular transaction, it may be the read lock or the write lock. That means if you want to have that particular transaction with having write lock, so you are telling to the database that right now I am doing this transaction, in this particular moment there should not be any data share with any another user, because right now this is on priority, this transaction is on priority. Let this first transaction complete, then other user may interact with this particular data. So there are multiple type of transactions we are requesting. After that, when this transaction is means you have requested for that particular DB, another user may also request at the same time some of the transaction, and that whenever that request will come, suppose this is definitely basis of the first come first serve basis. So firstly, this transaction user 1 has already been requested a transaction lock. Now the second user, when applying the suppose he is selecting the query, or if he is modifying that particular data, now what will happen, this DB, here you can see at this level, that database will check the compatibility, that this for this particular data, the user 1, whatever the transaction rules he has applied, that means whatever lock rules he has applied, is that lock rule getting validated with that particular user 2 or not. This might sound you confusing. That means I am trying to tell you that if suppose if user 1 have given only read access rule into that particular transaction, now this user 2, if only reading out that particular data, then it will that means the data, whenever the data compatibility check is going by the database, it will be passed. If suppose user 1 is providing into that transaction only write only access, is having the exclusive lock, that means write lock he has applied, that means this particular user 2 can't write the same data, that means he can't modify the same data. At the compatibility check, the user 2 will end up with lock conflict error. And if suppose read has been, shared lock has been implemented by the user 1, and he is user 2 also asking for the read only, then what will happen, lock will be granted, it will be checked by DB, then lock will be granted. After that, transaction execution will happen. Whenever the lock will be granted, then transaction execution will happen, and this DB releases lock. That means whenever this transaction will be completed for both of the users, this DB will release the lock. That means whenever user 1 transaction will get complete, it will release the lock completely. So this is how the whole locking process of whole transaction or whole you may say code execution goes on. And how is it important? You already get to know that if suppose this lock is not applied, user might end up with having data inconsistency, that for the some particular data 2 users may be updating that same data, which is not the best practice and not even the acceptable at all into the database system, right? Now I will talk about one most common scenario anybody face into day-to-day activity, that is suppose there is some data modification going on by the user 1. Now if user 2 is also on the priority that he need to see the data, he doesn't want to write the data, he doesn't want to modify that data, but he need to see that data. And if user 1 has not means he is already modifying that data, even then this user 2 can see that data without having interference in that modification, because commonly what happens, if the one user is modifying that data and if second user is querying the data that what all he just want to see the data, in that case even the user 2 who is needed to have that data displayed over in front of him, he will end up with having awaiting response. That means his response will be delayed until and unless that particular modification is complete. So to bypass this particular scenario, that user 2 should also be able to see the data whatever it is right now into the DB. User 2 need to apply with no lock statement over there into the select statement. Select star from DBO cells, which we saw into the previous video. We suppose cells is the table. If you want to see that the cells table data, you just need to apply with no lock condition over there. It will do what? It will keep that modification going on. Also this user 2 will be able to see that data completely. So this is the common scenario anybody faces into day-to-day activity or day-to-day you may say SQL programming. So this was whole about overview of this particular locking in SQL, and hope this video you found it relevant and knowledgeable. If you found it informative, kindly like to the video, subscribe to the channel, and see you in the next video with some other topic. And I will be explaining ahead this locking concept in some another part, in which I will be going more in depth on the code level, that how is it been getting executed or how is it getting applied on code level. So all these things we'll be watching in some another part. So that's all for now. I'll see you in the next one. Thank you so much guys for watching the videos.